Lights are on. So, nice to meet you. I'm Nikolay Kononov. I want to present you my next book and the story which stands behind this book. The main character is here. Here is Evald Ilyenkov, a Russian, Soviet underground Marxist philosopher. At the same time, I can't say that this story is about just one main character. There are just 4 persons who were involved in it. Evald Ilyenkov was a conductor of educational experiment in the 70s. And there were 4 persons who were involved in this experiment. They were children. They were deaf-blind children. That means that they practically had no consciousness from the moment of their birth. And their names were Sergei Sirotkin, Yuri Lerner, Natasha Korneyeva, and Sasha Suvorov. So there were 3 boys and 1 girl. And the aim of the experiment was to develop the consciousness, develop the process of thinking of a persons who only could feel a touch of something, a physical touch, who don't know what the anger is, what the joy is, how could a man suffer because they don't know how to get pleasure from life. So they could just one feeling, manual. And finally they succeeded. These 4 children graduated from the university and became scientists. And this is just the very common setting. And Evald Ilyenkov made friends with his children, and he influenced their fates. So this is the common setting, and now I just want to give some context to the story. After the death of Joseph Stalin in 1953, a thaw came, ottepel in Russian. It's time when Stalinism was accused as a cult of a personality, and the Stalinism was also accused that in the fact that it was a huge step away from communism, from the way to the communism. And there was a great take from the generation of this post-Stalin era is in the take that they just need to return to the early days of Great Revolution in 1917, 1918, and start from the scratch once again. And that was a pretty romantic view to the revolution and to the another attempt to reach communism some future. But it was really a mass action. That in Russian, intelligentsia, which means the most educated part of the population, were really involved in this action, in getting to communism once again. And Evald Ilyenkov was the son of Soviet writer. This writer was very, very official one. That means that he got every goods which a man could wonder from the Soviet state. A huge dacha, like country house, a huge apartment block in the center of Moscow, and so on. And when the Second World War started, Evald Ilyenkov enrolled to an army like an officer in artillery. And he was like 19 years old. And he served as artillery officer, and he ended up in Berlin in 1945. There he met with his father, who was a feud war reporter for Soviet newspapers. And there is a photo, I don't know, I haven't it yet, but when he and his father shot together in one photo, and it's a kind of epic photo because there are two generations of the older communists and the young one who met in Berlin. And Ilyenkov stayed in Berlin for several months after the war ended. He was a fan of Wagner, I mean the composer. He played piano, and he bought all the partitures of all the Wagner's operas and symphonies, and to his great unpleasure, Soviet war officials didn't let him take all the records of Wagner back to the Soviet Union. So he was a representative of this fourth generation, and when he went back to Moscow, he entered the Moscow State University in the philosophy faculty. He was 24 years old. That means that he was a bit older than all other students who went there soon after school. And he had an authority for being a person who came directly from the war. So he was a kind of hero. And when Stalin died in 1953, he was a graduate student this year, and this was also the year of his first scandalous speech. He and his mate Korovikov made a kind of report in which they stated that philosophy itself is a science about thinking, dealing with thinking, how we think, what thinking is, what is the process of thinking, what could it be. And that was scandalous because typical Marxist-Leninist point of view that philosophy was a tsar or just monarch of all of the sciences. And it should be infiltrated by Marxism-Leninism. And Ilyenkov just put it more clear that philosophy is a science about thinking, and that's it. And there was just a panel discussion in which he was convicted of making some scientific crime, and but the part of the audience was pro-Ilyenkovian, and they said like he is right. And when the Soviet bureaucrats saying, "Oh, there is a threat of philosophy being reduced to thinking," this part of audience just laughed and said, "To be honest, you are not in the danger of thinking. Thinking is a bit far away from you." So this was the start. But after this scandal, he was pushed out of the Moscow State University, and he entered the Institute of Philosophy as an ordinary, I don't know how to call, научный сотрудник. That means a person who just researched, like a minor researcher. And he started to deal with the question of consciousness, of personality, of building of the personality, and the creation of consciousness. And he was a Spinozian thinker, and he was a classical Marxist as well. And in 1956, he published, but it was published in underground. It was printed copy by copy and sent in hands to hands, peer to peer, article named "The Cosmology of the Spirit." This was very outstanding for this year, for this Soviet epoch document. The main point was that, as we know from the second law of thermodynamics, the universe keep cooling down. And in the end, it would be cooled down totally. And in this very moment, the humanity should restart the universe, making a huge blast, something like the Big Bang. And for doing this, humanity needs no egoism inside it. That means that communism is not just a political model, it's just a state of mind when people can send their lives to this, can just say goodbye to their lives with having the goal of saving the universe. And that was his great take against capitalism, because while being in capitalism, humanity will be a bit egoistic and will not perform such a great and terrible at the same time action. Okay, so this was 1956, and nobody thinks about this, and he was a bit scared of his own text, and he never published it. But this text made him really famous in the among the philosophers. And later he visited 3 or 4 times Hegelian Congress in Vienna. He also visited Berlin. But this was just visits for 2 or 3 days to conferences, and he had no opportunity to talk with his peers in the West. The only exception is Georg Lukács, a prominent philosopher with whom Ilyenkov got acquainted via Lifshitz. Lifshitz was a translator of Lukács' texts in Russian. So the main distinction between neo-Marxists, which Ilyenkov was obviously was, and the Western leftists, neo-Marxists, was that he acted inside the system, inside the state, which made the final attempt to stand and go ahead on the rails towards communism via socialism. And so he was involved in this huge social and political experiment. And from his side, the Western neo-Marxists lived in a liberal democratic society, and they just spiced up the public discussion about what the future should be. But they themselves were not revolutionaries. And he realized himself as a member of the party, member of the philosophical movement, which changes the whole country, the whole state, now and here, and other states which were involved in social field of influence. But this ottepel, though, didn't last for a long time. In 1964, the General Secretary of KPSS, Khrushchev, retired, and the next General Secretary was Leonid Brezhnev. And Leonid Brezhnev was not so liberal, and his environment was not so, political environment was not so liberal. They didn't trust in communism, so. And in 4 years later, in 1968, Russian troops invaded Czechoslovakia, invaded Prague. And this was kind of tragedy for Ilyenkov, who understood that military invasion is an absolutely incorrect way to build solidarity between socialism states in which socialism is being grown. And then, step by step, ottepel ended up. Intelligentsia, and so the most educational class in Soviet Union, understood that all these beautiful and romantic words about our new way to communism was a fake. So the reality is, with the tanks invading Prague and the soldiers who were firing on civilians, and then one by one intellectuals switched from Marxism and from Leninism and from communism to something exotic like Zen Buddhism or UFO studies, and some yoga studies, and so on and so weiter. That means that Marxism was not fancy. It became absolutely not fancy. I mean, in intellectuals terms too. And one by one, students of Ilyenkov, from his colloquiums and seminars, they one by one switched to something else. They began to learn Sanskrit, for example, or doing something like this. Something away from the current politics. And the current politics were really awful. On the other hand, the dissident movement arose, but Ilyenkov have no ties with dissident movement, because dissident movement was made by Western liberals. I mean, with the people with the mind of Western liberals. They see Western liberal democracy as an etalon, is something which is the final point of their way, instead of communism. And Ilyenkov was very discouraged by the fact that many of his students, many of his peers, academic peers, switched to something distant from the reality. And at that year, 1968, his friend Alexander Meshcheryakov invited him to join this educational experiment with the deaf-blind children. Alexander Meshcheryakov was a philosopher too, but he had a strong accent on the pedagogical issues. And he invented a special pedagogical method, how to teach deaf-blind children which were deaf-blind from the moment of their birth. And this was a crucial point, because it was more or less clear how to teach deaf-blind children who got their disease and then got blind and deaf in adolescence or in their early school years, but not from the birth. And here was a special method. the method looked like this. At first, the child should do some very simple things, like putting the cord on, or just taking the spoon and eat. The second step was to feel and to palpate this, for example, spoon. Yeah? So see the contours of the spoon. This is a Spinozian term, contour. Yeah? The thinking is the movement of the contour of the things, Spinoza said. And then when a child palpates this spoon, then a gesture should be learned by him or her. So from the palpation to the gesture which make a sign of the spoon, like this, for example. Then child was taught to make gesture signs to some other things around him or her. Yeah, so it could be a plate, it could be a shirt, it could be a pencil, and so on. And then was the crucial point with this gesture, a sign of something, should be decomposed to some letters, A, B, C, D, F, and so then. And these letters should be transferred from one person to each other by dactylology signs. It means that it was A, for example, yeah, B and C, and when two persons speak with each other, they just like put making an input to the hand of each other. Yeah, one is making an input, other is hearing. So this named dactylology, this method, and then they should learn the whole dactylology alphabet just to communicate with each other. And the last step was to learn Braille alphabet, just to have an opportunity to read books which were published with the Braille type, by Braille type letters. So this was pretty hard. For example, the teacher had to repeat the movement, the contours of the spoon to that the spoon is connected with some gesture. He or she should repeat it 1,000 times. So it was a great job made by teachers. And that's it. And when Ilyenkov joined this experiment, the students, these 4 students, 3 boys, 1 girl, they have just taught Braille, and that they can communicate, they can have a group meetings. They invented a special device in which there were 5 or 6 workplaces around the table. Each has special spots in which some Braille stift goes up with different Braille letters on it, and it was a typewriter in which the teacher could translate this Braille language, so the gesture language into Braille language, and others just put their hand on this table where these Braille stifts went up, and they can just understand what is going on, what the speech is about. And when somebody wanted to speak, he took a personal ventilator and directed the wave of air to the teacher who was moderator. Yeah, so this was weird, but this was 1971. Yeah, and it was Soviet Union. It was something like I don't know, so something like first man in cosmos. And Ilyenkov befriended some of these guys. They graduated from school and they enrolled into the university, to the psychology faculty, and they went to Moscow. They lived in dormitory for students of the blind, for school for the blind, and they lived. They had been living there for almost 5 years. It was in the center of Moscow, and they had orientation canes, and that they traveled across the city with these canes and just on transport, public transport. So Ilyenkov was a materialist, but he was not a positivist. And in this experiment, he saw that his theory about the creating of consciousness, creating of thinking, implements, how it implements and how it works. And he was very happy to discuss the process of thinking with these guys, because they had very outstanding views to on many points. And for example, when they made a kind of, not press conference, but student conference, these 4 deafblind children were invited to sit on the stage, and the audience, the other students of the faculty questioned them about this and that, and one of the students asked, but how could you discuss the process of perception if you are blind? You can't see anything. What could you say about the perception? And one of these children gave the perfect Marxist answer. He said, but our eyes is your eyes. Our eyes is eyes of the humanity. You help us to see everything what we need. So we feel with you like a one body. So this was a very good take, and it was very close to what Ilyenkov thinks. One of his main points was that self is self plus some others, plus socium, plus at least one more person. So, and this was his answer to the problem of the alienation, which is core Marxist problem, the alienation and the atomization. And during this Brezhnev era, Ilyenkov saw more and more atomization, more and more alienation in the Soviet society, because everybody were involved in consuming, in getting more goods, in getting the best furniture from, for example, Poland or Yugoslavia, and so on. So this was very, very far away from the communism, from the main idea of communism. And Ilyenkov was happy that his students gave such an answers, because he see kind of hope for his ideas and for the whole society in this point of view. Later, one of the students sent him a letter in which he said that he wants to commit a suicide because he feels very, very disabled in terms of that he couldn't see, he couldn't hear the music. He thought that he liked music, but he had never heard music. And Ilyenkov wrote a letter back. He replied him, and he said that he totally understands all the problems of deafblind people, but at the same time, he sees that these problems are not unique, are not very exclusive. So these problems of loneliness and so on are installed in the human's nature. And then step by step he explained it, and he gave a hope to this guy, and he didn't commit suicide. He lived till 2023. He died at the age of like 72. But some years after this accident, Ilyenkov committed suicide himself. He was banned, his publications were banned. His students kept on going into Zen Buddhism and UFO studies. And he drank a lot. He was an alcoholic. But some sources, 2 or 3 sources, told me that a few weeks before, or maybe a month before his suicide, Ilyenkov stopped drinking. He didn't want anybody to think that he committed suicide because of his alcoholic disorder, that this was not a psychosis. So that was his fate. And there was a huge wave of critics towards this pedagogical experiment because it couldn't be replicated. Yeah, so the conditions in which these 4 children were taught couldn't be replicated in the scale of the whole Soviet Union. And Ilyenkov was the only person who dealt with it, and Meshrikov, the pedagogical expert, also was not a director of institute. He was just a director of the boarding school, of one boarding school. And the second wave of critics was about the fact that 2 of the participants of the experiment were not deafblind from the very birth. For some years, they had all the senses, and just then they got ill and they became deafblind. Nowadays, Ilyenkov is very well known as a Neo-Marxist philosopher, as a Hegelian philosopher, a person who connected Hegelian view and Spinozian view in Marxist thought. And all in all, I think that the fate of Ilyenkov and these children are they have strong rhyme with the whole fate of the communist project in Soviet Russia. Ilyenkov was born in 1924, in the year when Lenin died, so in the very beginning of the communist Russia, on Russia going to communion. And he died in the year 1979, the very severe zamorozki, that means very cold weather. It's like a metaphor for some political conditions. But at the same time, Ilyenkov had a strong view of the future. He made some predictions. He made some prediction about the artificial intellect, about science, about the future of the Soviet Union, of the collapse of the world political system. And it maybe sounds strange, but he looked a bit further than Fukuyama, who declared the end of history. Ilyenkov didn't think in such terms. He mostly thought like Andrei Sakharov about the convergence of two world orders, socialist left order and liberal democratic order. So my book would be about this constellation of fates of these deaf-blind children, their experiment, and Ilyenkov and the whole communist experiment at all. I just want to show you some photos. So just the final quotation about Ilyenkov, that he was the only Soviet Marxist to be taken seriously. Point. Slavoj Žižek. So here's the Ilyenkov plays the piano. Here's Ilyenkov with his wife, who was also a philosopher of pedagogy, of education. She was a specialist in British educational system. Her name was Kadriya. She was ethnically Turkish and Azerbaijan, and this built her special special character and special self-identification, self-identity. I mean the identity. This couple once again. So here you see the teletector, this gadget, this device with which a person who can type can send messages to his deaf-blind children. They read it by these braille types. Teletector, they called it. And the man of the century is Meshcherikov, is the conductor of the whole experiment and the director of Zagorsk boarding school for deaf-blind. And here you see the dactylology. Yeah, just communicate with writing books here. And this is Sasha Suvorov, and this is Natasha Korneyeva. So in the Ilyenkov's apartment on Tverskaya Street, and they often were invited to his private apartment. They had long talks. And Ilyenkov, at the end of their educational cycle, he could make the input of dactylology very fast. And this is his daughter. She is one of the main sources of my investigation made for this book. She's 70-something now. She is anti-Putinist, but she lives in Russia now. She can't leave. She sent me some archival documents and ego documents of Ilyenkov. It was very helpful. And in the day when Russian oppositioner Navalny was killed, she went to the memorial place near FSB, former KGB, and put their flowers in the memory of Navalny. She wasn't scared of this. This is Ilyenkov and his mates in the Hegelian Congress. I don't know two persons in the middle, but this one is Nelly Matrashilova, is a prominent Russian philosopher too. She was a specialist, he was the main Russian, Soviet Russian specialist on Hegel. And she left huge and broadly written memoirs about philosophers in Soviet Union, in post-war Soviet Union, in late Soviet Union. So it is in Vienna. So that's it. Yeah. So I just don't want to give some spoilers, but I just delivered a speech about the setting of the book, about the circle of the problems which I want to discuss in this book, to some biographical circumstances in which Ilyenkov, Meshcheryakov, Natasha Korneyeva, and other persons from this experiment acted. And now your questions are very welcome. Ladies.
Thanks so much, Nikolay. That was really fascinating and really wonderful to hear about a subject that I have no knowledge of. So it's so wonderful.
Could you please make it a bit louder?
I can also speak into the microphone more.
Okay.
But yeah, so thank you. It was
super.
fascinating. I was curious about, and especially now, it seems like at a moment of alienation and atomization, about this idea of the self as the self plus other sounds really interesting. I would love to know more. In your book, is it going to be purely biography? Is it also fiction? What's the sort of the mode of the book?
Thanks a lot for this question. I just forgot to mention that it would be non-fiction book. No fiction would be involved. Maybe a bit of theory fiction, but not much. At first I thought of a fictional novel, but then I understood that the very material, the historical material, doesn't allow me to make it fictional. Something goes wrong if I try to make something fictional from this. So I decided just to make it a non-fiction.
And a follow-up question to that, are any of the subjects, the 4 subjects, are they still alive?
No, the only person who is still alive is Natasha Korneyeva. I just could tell it in short. Sasha Suvorov became a PhD in pedagogical science. Yuri Lerner became a sculptor. Sergei Sirotkin became a bureaucrat. He was an official of the Society of Blind People in Soviet Russia. And Natasha Korneyeva is still alive, and she is the most interesting person because, on the one hand, she was a scientist too. She was a researcher in the Institute of Psychology of Soviet Academy and then Russian Academy of Sciences. On the other hand, she was the only person who succeeded in making a family, starting a family, and she married a person named Yuri Krylov, and she has 2 children. And when I started trying to get in contact with her, my sources told me that his spouse, Yuri Krylov, is a bit abusive. He don't let her to talk with strangers, especially with journalists. And this is the very unpleasant case of a person who can hear, the partner who can't hear and who can see in some very strict and really abusive conditions. But then it turned to be next turn of this story occurred, and I found out that her husband and she too, they were Catholics. They visited Catholic Church in Moscow, and at the same time they were oppositioners, they were anti-Putinists. They visited the rallies against Putin and Putinism. And then I found out that 2 children of them live now in Poland. They emigrated. And finally, I found out that they too, I mean the parents, Natasha Korneeva and her husband Yuri Krylatov, are going to emigrate to Poland too, and because they now see no opportunity to stay in Russia in such kind of political regime. And this is the crucial point of my investigation, because I need to talk to her. And it's very hard to convince their family that I am that person which they can trust. So my task now is to build this trust with this source. And I'm doing my best. Please.
Hi, thank you so much. I was wondering about the form again. Will it be then more like a classical biography, or will you also be in the book as the researcher that you are? For example, if you're saying I have to build up that trust with that family, is this something you will describe in the book? So how present will you be in the book?
Thanks a ton for this question too. I think it obviously would not be a biography, even a critical biography. That would be some experimental narrative, I think. I don't think that I myself would be involved in the narration, but it is rather questionable. Now I'm just trying to find a tone for this narrative. I just trying to write some episodes just to feel the matter of this story. And this is obviously the very important point for me. I am in this important point because it is really a starting point. And I think that that would be a bit of theory fiction, but it's inevitable. If you're writing about a philosopher, you can't write without some discussions about some explanatory pieces about, for example, this article written by Ilyenkov, The Cosmology of Spirit. Yeah? And it's rather difficult to explain his development of Spinozist thought, but I'll try. So this is an interesting point too. I mean, just interesting in the terms of craft of writing, yeah, how to choose what to tell and what to stay focused on. But on the other hand, it's very, very interesting. It's very interesting task, very interesting material, very interesting story, and a very interesting constellation of 2 different lines, of 2 different experiments and its outcomes. Are there any questions? If not, then...
Спасибо, Nikolay. You talked about Zagorsk. Does this mean that the institute where they conducted the experiments were in Zagorsk?
Yeah.
Okay,
So
not in
Zagorsk
Moscow.
is a small town near Moscow, and this boarding school for deaf-blind children was in Zagorsk. Nowadays, Zagorsk is called Sergiev Posad. This is the place where the huge monastery, the main official Russian Orthodox Church monastery is. So this was just the town in which this boarding school was.
And perhaps you could also speak a bit about the work you made on Восстание, the revolt. How is it in English? I don't know. Your last novel?
The Uprising.
The Uprising, yes. Because you wrote this book as a biography in the first person, biography of Solovyov. And it's really a wonderful book, very impressive and very strong. So you really found the voice of Solovyov to tell his life. So you don't think you will do the same with Ilyenkov, if I understand.
This is a very concrete and difficult question for me, because for sure, after succeeding in making a first phase narrative in The Uprising, my previous documentary novel, I face a kind of temptation to make the same thing in this book. But as I have told before, the very material of this book, the stories, don't allow me to use this method here, but at the same time, I can use some minor features of this method. So just to tell it shortly, The Uprising is my previous novel. It was based on the book in which prisoners, Soviet camp political prisoners, wrote down his dreams. So he woke up, his name was Sergei Solovyov, he woke up in the morning and then put his dreams in the dream book. But these dreams were not usually really dreams. That was his pieces of memory concerning his days when he was free, when he took part in World War II, when he was a child and in the house of his parents in Russia, when he was a displaced person in Belgium and in France after the World War II ended. So this person, Sergei Solovyov, was a leader of international uprising in Gulag in 1953. After Stalin's death, there was a wave of uprisings, and the most big uprising was in Norilsk. It is near the North Ocean, North Pole, Taimyr. That was the name of the peninsula in the far north of Russia. And he was the leader, and he made an underground democratic party in this camp. Then he was captured and sent to the east, to Magadan. This is the famous Gulag territory described by Shalamov. And then there he made another uprising, and he managed to flee. I made a first phase narration. So I used first phase narration, that in the beginning of the book, I wrote a kind of intro in which I said that I traced the life of Sergei Solovyov. I conducted a great and long investigation, and I feel that I can take his voice. That would be a step towards empathy. That would be an act of empathy in a literary way. And yes, this book was shortlisted for some awards, and it was translated by Noir sur One, and I think that this method went well.
I feel that does it work? Yes. I feel that the power of empathy that literature has could very well apply to your project as well, to your new project. One aspect that fascinates me, it's the question of language, of how do these people communicate, and how does it feel to be in a world that I imagine being like complete darkness, but it must be much more, I guess, complicated or richer than that. What does it mean to communicate only by touch? And I feel that in that case, literature could maybe be a way of making us feel this situation and the progress of these children.
Yeah, I got the point. I'm thinking about it for sure. Here is some ethic problem. That means that let them speak, let them describe themselves. So my friend conducted a literary colloquium for deaf-blind persons, and he asked them how did they feel, and they are writing about their feelings. So on the one hand, these voices are not silenced at all. On the other hand, I think that I could include some voices in this book, as well as my own narration. So yes, I'm thinking about it, and it is a powerful tool. You're absolutely right. It's a powerful tool, but I must use it very intelligent and very with empathy for all. What about some more questions? Okay, if there are no more questions, then there are a bit more wine and some crackers, I don't know. Thanks a lot for your patience and the questions.